information, advice from the Buddha via the minds of the Tibetans. That's the style I know about. Yeah, that'd help us become. I love this saying, become your own person. I love that. Our mothers would say that. Become your own person. This is actually a profound statement. This is exactly what it is. So what's the person? Well, Buddha says we can become a Buddha, fully developed, rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness. Kind of extreme, but that's what he says. He's done. So we think even a little bit of that will be pretty incredible. So we're going to listen for this purpose. And because also we live in this crazy world, along with everyone else, we'll start to realize we're all in the same boat. So we'll start to have a sense that everybody's like me and wants to be happy too. So we'll have a sense, a wish to want to help them. So may that be the motive for why we're sitting here together. That's enough. So just now I put on those little videos I do, those 90-minute ones. The last few has all been about what we call self-compassion, which is a totally Western view, a totally Western concept, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with it. It's okay. But let's talk about Buddha's perspective on this, because it's really, really specific and it's shockingly different from what we think. But it's the essence of the Buddha's teaching. So if we can get it, even intellectually, and it's hard to hear it even intellectually, then we're on track, So basically, there are two things in our lives. There's the outside world, and then there's our mind. And really think about it, that's it. One point. Second point, we all want to be happy, and we do not want suffering. And the Buddha happens to say, join the universe, everybody's the same. And he happens to be saying, you know what, folks, I've found a method. That's really all. It's very simple words. So he's basically saying, whereas you guys think, and this is what he means by, quote, being in samsara, unquote, you people think, and this is our addiction, and he says we've been doing it for countless lives, we utterly believe this without question. It's totally ingrained in us. We totally believe that the main source of happiness and suffering are out there. So we can see, because on the basis of that belief, which we don't question, we spend our lives trying to avoid the ugly things, and we're talking the simplest level of suffering here, not even this more nuanced levels of suffering that Buddha describes. The simplest level being that suffering is when the bad things happen and happiness is when the good things happen. This is a very simple way we think. So he's saying we believe utterly, and we can see in our lives, this is the proof is in our lives, that happiness and suffering, their main source are the outside. So on the basis of that, we then try to avoid the ugly things, push them away, if we can, and to bring close the delicious things. That's it. Have a look at your lives. Of course we think that way. See the proof in your own life every day, every second. And he says, there's some truth in it. He's not arguing that the cake does definitely play a role in our happiness, that the boyfriend's kind words definitely play a role in our happiness. No question. But he says, it's not the main one. That's all he's saying. The trouble is because the words are sort of like arcane, Tibetan, 1200 years, Indian, 2000 years old. And second, we think it's religion, something to believe in. We can't hear properly, And all he's saying is, you haven't hit the nail on the head yet. The source of my happiness and my suffering are in the mind, the main source, main one. That's it. And in the mind simply means our approach, our attitude, our interpretation of events and people and things. So it's actually not complicated. Intellectually, this is not a complicated concept. But because it's so utterly opposite to what we do and what we believe, we literally, almost literally can't hear it. Because our assumptions are so deep, It's kind of fascinating. So, okay, that's the first point in general. So therefore, okay, now, full stop, turn the page, a new topic. Let's look at what we think of as compassion. Taking the view of what suffering is, and as far as the Buddha is concerned, it's just the first level. If we look at the Four Noble Truths, which is the very first Buddha's basic presentation of this point that I'm making here, but he frames it as how to stop suffering and how to stop suffering and its causes. And you flip that over, that equals for the Buddha how to get happiness. He doesn't state it as that. It's stated in terms of suffering. Identify what it is, number one. Number two, identify the causes. Number three, he's telling us you can get rid of both of those. and 4, how to do it. So framing it another way, which makes it more exciting for us, is how to get happy. Because the end result of getting rid of suffering and its causes is your happiness. So if we look at the word, so right back to, even before we get to compassion, look at this then, what does the word happiness mean, and what does the word suffering mean? We know we want the first one and don't want the second, but let's get a clear analysis, let's get a clear definition, because this already is a problem. Buddha's telling us that because we're so addicted to believing that the cake is the cause of happiness, that and because of that, we even conflate the cake with the experience of happiness. So when I ask you, tell me about your happiness, you will describe the cake. Tell me about your happiness, you'll describe the beautiful new boyfriend. We know that. So not only do we think the boyfriend is the cause of happiness, we believe the boyfriend is the happiness. In fact, when we think of memories, it's those events and those people, isn't it? This is really fascinating, actually. Well, the Buddha says they're merely catalysts. They do play a role, but merely secondary as a catalyst. This is so shocking, but it's technically the way Buddha's talking. So we don't even know what happiness means. We think it's the cake and the boyfriend. We think it's the event and the rainbow. No. They're the catalysts for what? For an experience of happiness, which is in here. These are technical points. Those are vague, romantic notions, you know. Happiness is in the mind. We experience happy feelings mentally, and we experience happy feelings through the sensory consciousness. So when we say that, we know it. Oh, I see that. I have happy feelings. But because, like I said, because we're so addicted to believing the cake is the cause, what our mind is preoccupied with is the cake. And then we have the memory of the cake. And then we describe the cake because we think that's the happiness. It is not. So we're really up a garden. No, you can't be up a garden without a paddle. What is it? You're up the creek without a paddle. Or you are up the creek without a paddle. But also what's the other one about a garden? You're up a garden path. I love that one. Like you're living in La La Land. We're not on track. When we understand these are quite technical points, that's really helpful to us. Otherwise, we hear it as sort of woolly and emotional, you know, and confusing. But these are technical points. This is Buddha's analysis. So if we say we're Buddhists, I mean, surely you try to find out what Buddha's analysis is. If you say you're a mathematician, you better know how to count. Not just, oh, I love mathematics. Yes. What's 1 + 1? Oh, I don't know. Well, I'm sorry, you're not a mathematician. So the self-compassion business. This is a really powerful point, I tell you. So again, that's not what the Buddha would say, because compassion by definition for Buddhist psychology is defined as a thought in the mind starts with a thought and you grow it by practicing it. It becomes affection, becomes emotional. You have to grow it. It starts with a thought, and the thought is, when you see someone suffering, you see something unhappy out there, like a person or a dog being hurt or something, and we're talking the grosser level only, when the bad things happen, your heart reaches out. Oh no, may you not suffer. That's compassion. So compassion by definition is for another's suffering. There's not even a thought. There's not even a label equivalent in terms of self. So, but I think it's useful because we use it. So let's look at what Buddha means by, if you are having compassion for yourself, what does that mean? Because this is the point now. Well, this is the part that's shocking. So when we are suffering, and we all suffer, even at this first level, we all have bad things happen, join the universe, you know, then it is painful for sure. Or when we see, this is also interesting, when we see suffering, that's particularly powerful as well. So when we have suffering, when we see suffering, simply again, the first level, when the bad things happen, we need a respite from it. Of course we do, because it's too painful. So this is what we mean by self-compassion. If you're working, let's say, in a hospital where you're dealing with suffering people all the time, it's exhausting. When you're dealing with children all day, you're dealing with suffering, unhappy people just walking through the streets or driving on the freeways. You know, you need a break. So that break is what we mean by having self-compassion. And that means in that break, we'll have a massage, we'll have a little weep, we'll have a little sleep. Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. But that's all we think of as self-compassion. We don't have any methods of working with our mind to cultivate this self-compassion, to give us that break from the pain. Nothing wrong with it, but again, it's dealing with the externals. Because if you're sitting there, let's say you see the suffering world, like, all the sick people, the poor people, and you have compassion. But also what happens, because we have a wrong analysis from the Buddhist point of view about why the people are suffering, because we have a view of everybody who's suffering by definition as an innocent victim, then we also have anger. So to have a break from that anger and the suffering, we need the massage and the sleep, and that's good. Go home, have a rest. How amazing you've got a home to be able to rest in and have a little weep. Nothing wrong. But until, this is the point now, we work on what's in the mind, nothing will ever change. You'll go back to work tomorrow and the same anger will arise and the same exhaustion will come. So what self-compassion is for Buddha, noting what we said first, is working on our own mind, identifying the states of mind that are the source of this suffering. And what are they? Well, one, compassion is not the cause of suffering. This is where we have to look at the Buddhist model of the mind. Very clear presentation. You've got neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, distorted, distressing, disturbing states of mind that we are very familiar with. Anger, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem. We know these. And then we have love, compassion, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, and so on. They're utterly different. They're two clear divisions. They're totally different states of mind, which already is a shock because we conflate them half the time and mix them together like a big soup. So what's happening is when we see a person suffering, just forget ourselves, another person suffering, we reach out to that person, like a little dog. We do have compassion. Oh my God, look at that suffering. But because we think that mean person kicked them, they're the blame, the next second we become angry. Or let's say we see all the suffering in the world and we have compassion. You think of Ukraine, let's say, for example, the latest war zone or the latest shooting, let's say, and you do have compassion. But then because we don't have much of an analysis, we're talking from the Buddhist perspective, please. Buddha has an analysis. It's called the law of karma. If we don't have that analysis, then we have the compassion, but then it arises fear, depression, anxiety. Oh my God. And we just simply can't bear to look at it. It is too much for our poor minds. So either we get angry, when we see the suffering of the innocent victims, or we just get fearful and freaked out and we bury it away. So first of all, the negative, unhappy, neurotic, delusional states of mind these are the ones that in their nature are the source of suffering. That's their function. First, right in here, the painful experience that arises when attachment is there, that when jealousy is there, when depression is there, anxiety, anger, they are in their nature. This is what's so fascinating. That in their nature, they're rooted in fear. And that's because they're rooted in the root delusion, the primordial misconception of the very function, the very nature of self. And that in its nature, its flavor, its taste is fear. So all the neuroses, their flavor is fear. Their flavor is anxiety and worry. We've got to understand that. But love, compassion, kindness, by definition, are not delusional. They're relatively valid. They're rooted in interdependence, and they're brave, open, spacious states of mind. And they cannot possibly cause suffering. This is completely Buddha's analysis. This is not how we think in our culture. But unless we study the Buddhist model, how on earth in the hell in the name of God are you going to know that? Name of God, whatever, an old Catholic. Do you understand? This is really incredibly important. And most of us don't study the mind. We know these words, Buddha says, blah, the three poisons, blah, attachment, blah, So the compassion, when you see that, I don't want to see me, I want the gallery. Where's the gallery? Doesn't come. To the right, on the little right. And I've got my little boxes. Well, I just want to look at the screen. No, I don't want to see me. I want to see the people. Gallery view? I know I can try. I can sit. I jump on the squares. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. So come and get me the gallery, please.
Where was just?
I know it's here. All the pictures were just there.
No, but I don't. Oh, I was not sure.
This one here. Yeah. Here we go. Gallery. That's it. Thank you so much. Very good. Okay. So So let's just now just go into detail about these pieces I've just said. We have the neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based states of mind. And these states of mind are, for the Buddha, in his analysis, the main source of our own pain. Not the objects. They play a role. Of course they do. But this is the point that's so shocking. That's so simple intellectually, but extremely shocking and extremely hard to do because we are addicted to the opposite. The degree that we have attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, fear is the degree of our suffering. That's essentially Buddha's analysis, and therefore the methodology is implied, isn't it? So you change your mind. You don't want suffering, honey child, then change your mind. I mean, it's like annoyingly simple, you know. So compassion, love, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, if they prevail in our lives, then you will not suffer that much. This is the point, no matter how bad the world is. This is the whole point. So of course it's hard for us because we're not practiced. So we have to be very cautious. So if the world is too overwhelming for us, we get so much fear or so much anger or so much depression, we have to keep away from the damn world. Don't look at the damn iPad. Don't read the news. Play safe. Be careful. Take care of yourself. That is the first one of self-compassion. Keep away from the dramas. Second, self-compassion is begin to work on your mind. This is literally the approach, you know. But our trouble is because we hear religion as punitive and we hear Buddhism as punitive and we hear karma as really punitive. Then we think, oh, you mean it's all my fault? You know, we can't hear it properly. So that's real self-compassion. When we can see that our own depression and anxiety and jealousy and fears, which run our lives half the time. I mean, this is not being critical. We have no reason to be guilty. But we need to identify it and have kindness towards ourselves. So find the conditions that are appropriate for us to cultivate a practice where we can slowly work on these states of mind. And yes, have a weep and a sleep and a lie down and a massage. Nothing wrong. But that alone won't work. It'll temporarily alleviate your anxiety, but you'll go straight back to work tomorrow and you'll kick straight back into the anxiety. So as long as we believe the work and the war and the hurt dogs are the main source of suffering, then yes, I mean, then nothing will ever change. So if you do know it is your own mind, but still the external environment plays a role, if you're not brave enough to face the world, no one says you should be, then you keep away as much as you can. You be wise. So keeping away from the trouble if you can, that's self-compassion. And then because now you've got sort of like the ability to work on your mind more. That's what Buddhist practice is. It's the method to help you become suffering less suffering. That's it. That's self-compassion to Buddha. Plus the massage and the lie down and the weep and the hug. Nothing wrong. We need that badly, and how precious that we have even one friend on this planet who can give us a hug, you know, how incredible. But the shocking part is, it's not the suffering that causes us suffering. It's not the suffering out there that causes me suffering. The suffering out there triggers compassion. So again, too, it's not compassion that causes suffering. That's the part that's shocking. So we've got to really look carefully at the logic of that. And so starting with the basic Buddhist model of the mind, the deluded states of mind and the virtuous states of mind, these two categories. And really, besides the third lot, you know, like intention, concentration, motivate, all these kind of, I like to call them the mechanical parts of the mind that are neither in their character virtuous nor in their character non-virtuous, which is the way that Buddha describes these different states of mind. This is our world. This is our life in here. You've either got the neurotic, ridiculous, deluded, I-based states of mind, then you have the virtues. So the bottom line is to lessen the first lot and grow the second lot. That is how you get happy. You see, the Four Noble Truths is how to get happy. It's how to free yourself from suffering. That's what it means. It's how to get happy. So, you know, that's not the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva path is a compassion wing. That's another discussion. This is for us. The Four Noble Truths is for us. Is the methodology for oneself. Excuse me. That's what we have to remember. So this stuff is, we've heard, I mean, I've probably said this thing 47,000 times. Every time I say it myself, I go, oh, wow, that's helpful. Where did I learn that from? Wow, that's good. I have to say it again because I'm listening, you see. We have heard it countless times, but it's like anything, you've got to keep hearing it, and a little bit dribbles in, a little bit of clarity comes, then we forget it again. Not because we're stupid, it's because the habits are totally primordially ingrained in our being, So we have to be very humble and kind with ourselves and know it just takes time to reprogram our minds. But that's why it's good to start with the words. And that's a big problem when it comes to what we call spiritual. If I say to you, what's 1 + 1? You will not say, well, I kind of know the answer, but I just sort of can't say it. You either don't know it or you do. But if I say to you, what's attachment? Well, I sort of know what it is, but I can't say it. We all say that. Well, that's cheating. If you can't speak it out as a definition, you don't know what it is. Okay, you might know. Okay. Some of us have a very strong feeling for these things. And that's because we practiced them before. That's really good. But that's a bit like, because you've got a strong feeling for music, you can play Bach easily because you practiced it before. But if you can't learn the theories, that's very selfish of you because you can't teach me. Oh, I just feel it. I can't explain it. Well, mind you, how mean of you. So having the theories, you can explain to yourself then what the feeling is, what the music is, and now you can explain to me how to get it. That's what Buddha's doing for us so kindly. He maps it out with simple words, The words we start, because we live at a conceptual level. We've got these different levels of mind, and the level we function at, we've got the sensory, and that's an old other discussion. We give so much, we make the body the boss, as Lama Zopa says, But we've got the mental consciousness, and then the grosser level of it is conceptuality, thoughts. So in this sense, Buddha is a brilliant cognitive therapist, cognitive behavioral therapist. He's like your best one, your first one, By changing your thoughts, you change your life. So that's the next point we have to contemplate, is how can anger be a thought? This is the biggest joke of all. How can love be a thought? How can passion be a thought? Well, they're rooted in being thoughts. And then that you build the emotions on top of them with habit. That's why we have to have concentration from shamatha meditation, a little bit every day. This helps us step back and listen to the thousands of conceptual stories in there that we wouldn't otherwise notice until they vomit out the mouth when it's emotional. And that's our tragedy in our culture. We only notice what's going on in our mind when it's severely emotional, and that's just like, that's the wheels falling off at 100 miles an hour. You've never bothered to notice the wheels wobbling all those years. And that's our tragedy in our culture. We only go to the therapist when the wheels fall off. In fact, I always say this, and it's a joke, but it's true. If you go to your therapist and you're very happy, everything's wonderful, your life's great, but today I got a bit annoyed at work with my husband. I got a bit annoyed with a worker. I got a bit annoyed with my husband this morning. She will just think you're pathetic, wasting her time and wasting your own money. Go home and wait. You want to kill him before you come back to me. And I'm really serious here, because we don't recognize there's a relationship between that mild annoyance and the violent anger 5 years later when you want to kill him, because it's built up. Or you're feeling slightly depressed, but we only go to the therapist when we're inert in bed because we can't even move from depression. So we have kind of like disaster, mental methods. You never do that with your teeth. You don't wait till they fall out before you go to the dentist. You don't wait, when we often do, wait till we're, severely sick before we go to the doctor. We have maintenance. I'm really serious here, but it's not our culture. But this is already major. This is why we have to have concentration and have some kind of practice every day where we start literally to hear, and every day it gets better and better, to hear the thousands of thoughts. We have to start somewhere that is constantly going at the back. And because we're so preoccupied with the outside world and preoccupied with our physical feelings, the pain in the knee, whatever, we just don't notice the mental consciousness, the thoughts and feelings and emotions. And you could say, forget about nirvana, forget about getting rid of all suffering, forget about realizing emptiness, forget about bodhicitta, even learning to practice what we just said so far. and learning to see the mind, owning that depression, anxiety, jealousy, anger, fear, distinguishing it. This is the miracle from love and compassion and empathy. And working on those, not the emotional level, the conceptual level. The emotional is just the result of thinking anger that often is now emotional. Depression is just the result of a buildup of internal kind of aversion thoughts, pushing something away, you know. Slowly you start to listen, and you can catch them when they're small. So you catch the annoyance with your hubbies and his slurping tea. So every day you recognize his slurping tea is the event, and your annoyance, which is mild anger, is the source of your pain. This is too hard for us. It's too painful because the slurping, we are so believing the slurping is so horrible. And this is the shocking part. The Buddha is saying, no, Robina, that slurping appears to you that way because you're listening to it through the lenses of aversion. That aversion in your mind is what describes the slurping. This is the essence of what Buddha is saying. But it's too hard for us. It's too shocking. Slurping we can maybe manage and maybe intellectually understand that it's interpretation. But when it comes to you seeing somebody rape somebody or see the dog being murdered, then it's too hard to hear how still the suffering is coming from my anger and my fear, not from seeing the event. That's very hard. It seems almost like, it seems mentally ill to say it like that. But technically it's true. Because this is the thing, okay, this is the thing, it's another example of how, okay. This is what wisdom is. See, wisdom, got the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, and wisdom is really ordinary level is common sense. So when we're living in delusions, where there's no common sense, we're just panicking, having panic attacks, we're distorted, we're not seeing things clearly, everything, we make mountains out of molehills. They're like, we're being a drama queen. This is not being nasty. That's the function of delusions. So because of that, one, we are suffering, but two, everything looks distorted because we're seeing everything through the lenses of those unhappy states of mind. That's the part that's really emptiness actually now. That's the part that's shocking because we can't see that. So the anger is really strong, you know, with the person, whoever who hit the dog or your hubby, he will appear ugly. And then we believe the ugliness is in your hubby, kind of coursing in his veins along with his blood. That's emptiness. That's the one that's the opposite to reality, what it says. As Lama Zopa says, everything's our own. No, the way Rinpoche puts it, the way everything out there appears back to us. Is in the aspect, how they say in Buddhist psychology, it's in the aspect of whatever is in the mind. These are technical points and we can write them down. This is our starting point. Otherwise, it's too confusing to us. This is Buddhist psychology. So like if your anger is huge, sure, your anger is the cause of the suffering, but if you can't cope with a husband, kindly leave him before you kill him or before he kills you. That's intelligent. In just the same way that your attachment to alcohol is the source of your suffering, not the alcohol. The attachment to alcohol, don't blame yourself. That's just the nature of it. That's the cause of your suffering. So nobody on the planet would expect you, please hear my words, would expect you to give up attachment to alcohol while continuing to drink alcohol. We get that. But when it comes to anger, we don't get it. You know, if you start to get that angry with your husband, then like with the alcohol, kindly remove yourself from him for your own sake. But we don't think of, you see, we don't think of it, anger as a suffering state of mind. We just think it's ugly. I always quote, and it's not a joke, that 40% of all women on the planet who get murdered, it's the bloke in the same bed who murders her. And it's not against men. It's talking about anger. And if we all had enough common sense, if you're male or female, to recognize the dynamics in your relationship, we had any self-respect whatsoever, which we don't, we would leave each other before the bloody damage was done. Excuse me. This is self-compassion. Oh my God, this is self-compassion. We know that when a person finally picks themselves up off the street and finally recognizes they're an alcoholic, that the suffering is exhausting. That's the same with any of our sufferings, the husband, the craziness, the kid, the work, the world, whatever it might be. Because this is the interesting point. Attachment, which is the suffering when you're addicted to alcohol, and anger and jealousy, they're all got the same status for the Buddha. Yes, some cause only suffering to you, which is why we're prepared. You see, we're prepared to have compassion for a person who's an alcoholic. We're prepared, which is attachment. We're prepared to have compassion for a person who's depressed because they're only harming themselves. But the minute we harm other people, we don't have compassion for them at all. Right? This is also the point. The first step to realize is we harm ourselves. This is the first one to realize. That when you can see how you harm yourself by being angry, then you can see, of course, how you harm others as well. And then you'll be able to have compassion for others who are angry because they're harming themselves. So until we see that we're harming ourselves, this is what Buddha means by renunciation. It sounds very noble, sounds religious. Renunciation meaning you want to give up suffering and its causes. And why would you want to give it up? Because you're exhausted by it. That's self-compassion. So renunciation is another word for self-compassion. You're so exhausted from the suffering. You're so sick of the suffering. You're so fed up with the old habits. You're so fed up with all your broken record habits. You're so sick of the pain and suffering that your delusions and behavior are causing you. That's a brave attitude because we just love to feel guilty instead, So we've got to remove all the guilt out of the way. We can't see it otherwise. And that's really, really difficult because there's another discussion because we're addicted to guilt. So what's guilt? Guilt is self-hate. Literally. I mean, quite literally, the state of mind of guilt is aversion, which is the basis of anger. Anger is just volatile aversion. Guilt is internalized aversion, that's all. When I say you did this and you did that and you did this, that's called anger. When I say I did this and I did that and I did this, that's called anger and it's called guilt because I'm the object. So we run to guilt automatically. And this is a terrible irony of ego. We love to hate ourselves. We think there's some virtue in guilt. But it's automatic. It's automatic. And this is rooted in attachment. They're all rooted in attachment. But guilt, I think, is very much rooted to the attachment to being seen as a good girl, which is the deepest attachment of all, the hardest one to see. I mean, attachment to alcohol and food, they're pretty evident, and they're the first level. But this deeper one is this attachment to be seen as a nice person, to be approved of, and stroked and loved and praised. This is very primordial, more than for sex and drugs and rock and roll. Guilt is rooted in that. Because when you're guilty, like you just broke the cup in the kitchen and no one saw you, but already you're imagining mummy and daddy or God or the church or your father, your mother, somebody criticizing you. Oh my God, I'm bad. I just broke a cup. Because you've got program in your mind that you're not supposed to break a cup. Who told you? Your mother did. So then you're almost imagining mummy, mummy finding you out. These are all very ingrained, we all recognize all of them. We're not going to see them unless we do this unpacking and unraveling. And these words are so common, but I'm using the Buddhist analysis here, not Jung, not Freud. This is the Buddhist analysis. We can all hear it. I think it's quite a revelation because it doesn't discuss what your mother did to you and what your father did to you. Because all the time ego wants to get off the hook. So we have to talk about the event all the time. Well, she did this and she did that and it was this and therefore that. And therefore I'm allowed to be this way. Look at me, poor me. It's not being cruel, although it sounds it. That's the way ego talks. Ego is a junkie that has to get off the hook. It's impossible to take responsibility. So it's a really courageous attitude. And again, it's self-compassion. But it takes courage and time to own all this out of kindness to ourselves. And then, yeah, if we can't cope with the world, keep away. If you can't stop, if you're so fed up with the fighting and you can't shut your damn mouth and it's exhausting being around that person, whether it's your mother or your husband, you need to have enough self-compassion to leave them. If you really can't change, you have to be intelligent. And that's a sign of self-respect, self-compassion, knowing what you can cope with. But because we're so afraid of what people think, we dare not think I should leave. Oh, no, I can't do that. Not supposed to do that. I'll get criticized. So we're kind of in this vicious circle, you know, paralyzed because we can't act. You recognize this, I'm quite sure. This is Buddha's analysis, okay? I'm talking like a modern person. I'm talking like an Australian person, but I'm talking exactly Buddha's teachings. I'm not trying to, and if I'm making a mistake, please point it out. So now you better ask me some questions, I think. All right, people. Who's host today up here? Well, it's you, isn't it? Are there any questions there, sweetheart? Sonny? In your computer, no, nothing. Any questions here? No? What do you think, people? We recognize, right? Anything you didn't recognize? We're all on the same boat, right? No? And the interesting point is, this is the work you do on yourself, which is the wisdom wing. And then to the degree that you can do this for yourself is the degree that you can go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. And then the compassion you'll have is much deeper and won't be rooted in anger. Because, you know, we're all causing our own suffering, you know, that's the thing. That's the one. Of course, karma is another whole discussion, which answers why even things happen in the first place. We're not discussing that one.
Hello, Venerable Robina. It's Kimberly. I do have a question.
Well, Kimberly, ask your question, darling.
So you had just said, if I can't leave, or no, sorry, if I can't change, I need to leave.
Yeah.
What is the thing? I would imagine it's delusion that makes.
Sorry, what? Say it again, Kimberly. What?
I'm thinking it's delusion that would make my mind say, "Oh no, I don't need to change. They do."
Well, that's the normal one. That's the usual one, isn't it? That's how we all
Yeah.
think, really, isn't
So
it?
is that delusion?
Well, what else would you think it is? There's either delusion or virtue, honey. There's
Well,
either,
it's delusion, then.
fact or fiction. That's
All
the
right.
way we're talking, isn't it, Kimberly? That's what we normally do. That's
Yes,
the usual view, isn't it?
it is. It's like, well, I don't have to change. They do.
That's
But I know,
Typical.
personally, I know I'm the one who needs to change. Thank you.
That's right. Thanks, darling. Good. Yes, people. Anybody else? Any old topic? Yes. Talk.
Thank you.
Hello.
So if I keep the focus on myself and pause enough.
Yeah.
Pause.
Yeah.
Pause,
Yeah. Yeah.
pause,
Yeah.
Most likely.
Can you people hear him? On the Zoom, can you hear him? We've got a microphone, please.
We don't have a microphone.
Well, maybe one day we should get a microphone for this very event type of thing when people are on Zoom, isn't it? Don't you think it's a good idea?
Yeah.
They're not expensive. Little handheld mic.
Yeah.
You sure you haven't got one somewhere?
Oh, yes.
Sure. Do you have one? No, George?
I'm sure there is one that it would have to be set up. with
Okay, fine. Just in case, there's no harm. So I'll repeat the question. Go on. So he's saying, so go on, if you pause and pause and pause, then?
I pause and pause and pause, and I don't go for my first thought, just like the booze. But you don't go for the first drink with the alcoholic, which is my thinking. I go for the first thought, I'm screwed.
So say I'm not quite getting the point. So say it a different way for me.
So it's my thinking that is getting me in trouble with myself, and that's why I can't look at myself if I react. If I'm always reacting, that's where the suffering is basically coming in if I'm not pausing enough.
Okay, so I think there's more to it. So pausing here, but it's all part of the strategy. So that's why the first point, and this sounds very boring to us in our culture. This is why the first level of practice, even in the way it's structured in Buddhism, the first level of practice is not about the mind yet. It's about controlling the servants of your mind. And guess what that is? Your body and your speech. So this seems so boring to us, but it's really a revelation. If we can have enough practice, that's why we have to live in vows and have, it's like learning to discipline. It's like doing what your grandma says, behave nicely. Because they say when you're with others, that's when you're mainly working on your body and speech. And when you're on your own, you have the luxury to work on your mind. So those pieces of advice are really powerful. So if you're in the middle of a big drama on the outside and you haven't controlled your speech, forget the pauses. It's all too automatic. So that's why we've got to have a daily practice somehow. And we have to learn to have conscious decisions. You know where you're going to go today. You know who you're going to see. You make a decision. And we mightn't go around raping and killing too many people, but the speech, oh my God. Then we can have the luxury of paying attention and making a decision to control the speech. Then you can, and so the trouble is with that in our culture, we only have two options: vomit everything out or completely suppress. And this is not suppression. It's being grown up and in charge of your body and speech. So you control what you say and do. It's a miracle. And when you're on your own is when you do the real work to prepare yourself for the next time. You get my point? Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So it's funny because the two of my friend and I were just talking about how to, I came out of the Courtin November course.
Okay.
And I'm trying to be in New York City.
Okay, right.
And I guess what you said about, knowing when you can't just be paying attention to the news all the time.
Knowing when what?
You can't be paying attention to the news all the time. Don't.
If it's too much for you, yeah. If it's too much, like the alcohol, if it's too much for you, try and
Don't
remove.
get sucked into the
Yeah,
drama.
yeah.
But I find it really hard because I feel like now more than ever in society with social media and all.
That's right.
Suffering.
It dominates the world, isn't it?
And there's actually a societal expectation to be paying attention to those.
Exactly, that's right.
But
So the question is,
so the question is, I think I totally get, don't pay attention to that. If it's too
you
much.
mean you acknowledge, so you understand to be skillful about what you put yourself into, what parties to go to, what things to go to, what places to be in, because you know you can handle it or can't handle it. Okay, so the question is,
Sorry, the question.
that's okay.
When I was walking around New York before I went to Copan, I didn't even notice I was putting up these walls in order to not see suffering because it's
I
just too
see.
much.
Yes.
So how do you balance not doing that, where you just literally don't see people as people,
I understand.
and being open when.
Okay,
there's
I understand. So
just-
if you've chosen to live in New York City. I remember, it was so funny, but I remember when I was in Santa Fe for the 2 years of the pandemic, Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's like a country town in comparison with New York. Honestly, I was in downtown. I had a room, an office in the center of town. And the biggest noise I ever had was once a week on Friday nights, you have the booming cars and their music sort of going around the block, There was, I don't think I hardly saw a homeless person. I didn't see people shouting and crazy on streets. And I went to New York briefly and I love New York. So I kind of like, oh my God, this is insanity. So it's high level insanity. So you've chosen to live here, right? You want to live
I
here.
actually don't live here anymore.
Oh.
But I'm visiting.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So then you got to know what you can handle. So then if you can't handle the people, don't worry about cutting yourself off. You need to cut yourself off. If you're an alcoholic, darling girl, you can't possibly think, oh, I must go to the party. I can't cut myself off. Cut yourself off. You've got to know what you can handle. Do it for the right reason, not out of aversion, not out of anger, not out of self-centeredness, because you just can't handle. So you have to balance that ability with knowing you've got to go to work today, you've got to see these people today. So you ready yourself for it. So it demands self-awareness. Do you understand? You've got to know what you can handle. So the Bodhisattvas, they love New York City. They're much better to be here than boring old Santa Fe. Not to mention being in the trees. The trees don't need us. Sentient beings do. And it's grist for their mill because nothing makes them crazy because they've given up attachment to the delusions. Do you see my point?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to know ourselves. This is self-compassion. Does it make sense? So the more you know your mind, so you enjoyed Copan? You enjoyed the course?
It was amazing. I heard so much about you. Too.
Oh, you did?
I was
Okay, good. Because I did the last one, 2019. That's right, yeah. Anyway, good. I'm happy. So Geshe Dunbach was good, wasn't he?
He was great.
He's great, isn't he? Yeah, it's good. Wonderful. There's this Dutch monk who's one of the Western Geshes. He's been just sort of graduated a couple of years ago. Yeah. And he's in London, based in London. Yeah, I understand. So just, you've got to be intelligent.
I think that's why I live in the countryside.
Okay, so whatever you need, but it's easy. Once you live in the countryside, one of the problems in the West is you can get very complacent. I'm not trying to force you to be around crazy people,
No, but yeah.
but if you use it well to help nourish yourself and strengthen yourself, then you do what you have to do. You're wrong. Okay, what else, people? Good points. Hello, Jim. How good to see you, darling. Unmute, sweetie pie. Unmute, baby.
Oh, so I'm trying.
There you go, Jim. There
How
you go.
are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
All right, so I'll just create a scenario, I guess. I mean, driving, I live in Long Island, so it's a harrowing experience to drive. And at least for me it is, and others. And so I get cut off in traffic. And so I get angry, but I don't take my car and ram it into the other guy's car.
That's good.
And I don't say anything outside,
Okay, good.
but inside I'm boiling.
Okay, I understand that. Then question.
What do I do with that energy?
Okay, this is the point. We're not used to, if we're not used to refraining from the words and calming the mind, if we're not used to that and we're not, then you can just have to do your best. You can't make it go away. You see, one of our problems, Jim, is we think if we shout, then it releases the energy. It does temporarily, but it also increases the habit to be angry. So you've got to kind of like find the way to handle that, and don't, it's like if we can't. So again, if we haven't practiced not having angry thoughts, if we haven't practiced not vomiting out the angry words, then it's not that easy. So all you can do is be where you're at, acknowledge it, recognize it, and do your best. And then as you can consciously practice every day, not saying the angry words, at least you don't harm other people, and then consciously practicing every day in your practice, working on your mind, slowly, things start to change. But it's not overnight, it's not magical. And don't be scared of it. So if are you in the car on your own in this scenario, or the kids are in the car as well?
Either one.
Well, I mean, no, it depends on the scenario.
Okay, so let's just say I'm with my kids.
Well, then you absolutely keep your mouth shut. It is not appropriate for the poor children to hear the father screaming. And then if you're on your own, maybe you scream and shout, but be aware of what's happening. But our trouble is we are so scared of what's in our mind. We're so scared of that energy. But if you as we become more conscious every day, we start to be able to develop this other kind of like, you've got your crazy roommates and you've got your good roommates in your head, and you start to cultivate your good roommates. You don't get guilty. You notice your crazy anger. It's been there a long time and it wants to shout and yell. And if you're on your own, so shout and yell, but be conscious. And then, okay, look at this ridiculous rubbish. See how it causes you pain, and then determined to slowly work on your mind. It's an ongoing process, Jim. It's like driving the car for the first time. You can't do it, but you've got to have the techniques, and you practice a little bit every day. There's no quick fix. Do you see my point?
I do. I've recently, what I've been doing is I've been putting a cap on the amount of time I allow myself to be angry.
Good, that's a good idea. That's brilliant. That's very good. That's very good. I remember my friend Sunny. Have you ever heard me talk about my friend Sunny in prison? Have you heard that story about this woman?
Mm-hmm.
She did that. She had this, she was innocent, accused of murdering policemen. She was in a cell on her own 23 hours a day, totally innocent. And she gradually came to this recognition that she could change her mind, that she knew she wanted to. So she said, I would give myself 5 minutes to be enraged. And then she would do her yoga, so it was it wasn't suppression. It was a conscious thing. That's brilliant, Jim. So keep moving, sweetheart.
I will. Thank you.
You understand? And the thing about exploding the anger, I was angry all my life. I prided myself on how honest I was, and I'd vomit whatever I felt to everybody, So for me, I hurt myself and I hurt others. So when you shut your mouth, at least you just hurt yourself, but you don't hurt others. That's a good step in the right direction. But you're doing right. So it's good. Give yourself time. It's okay, because if we can't handle the physical energy, because it's very powerful. It's true. But as long as you're conscious and aware and make aspirations and see yourself long term, and don't get guilty. Okay, if you kill somebody, that's difficult, so try not to harm others. Do you understand, Jim?
As an Irish Catholic, former Irish Catholic, with my guilt.
English Catholic, you're Irish Catholic. Okay, same. Okay.
Thank you.
But guilt is important not to have, because that just twists everything. It's just double trouble. Guilt, try to notice that one as well. Just be, we're a work in progress, Jim. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, sweetheart.
Thank you.
What else, people? Yes, someone. Yes.
So I was wondering, because when you talk about karma, you always say that, okay, somebody did something terrible to me, and so you tell me that they are not a source of my suffering.
They are, but not the main one. That's the point I'm saying. That's the point I'm making. You can't say the cake is not a very important factor in your ability to have pleasure when it hits your tongue, but your mind is the main cause of the happiness. That's the point to get. So it doesn't, when I punch you in the nose, you can't say I don't play a role. We've got very strong karmic connection, and then, you know, I harm you. And of course it plays a massive role, and it's inappropriate of me. I'm being very immoral, but because of the view of karma as an interdependent relationship there, but the main source of your suffering, one is your own past action, but two is your delusions. That's really the Buddha's full point. That's his Four Noble Truths. So when it comes to happiness, the trouble is we always talk about the suffering ones, but equally with the happiness, you and I have a lovely relationship. You give me $100 gift. There's no way in the world that you and your gift are not a catalyst in my happiness. One, I created the cause to receive that from you for my own past generosity, so I take responsibility for it. And two, my own capacity for joy and blah, blah, blah. So it's just factoring in more things than, do you understand? Get the point.
So what is the implication for when people do bad things? What is the implication for, you know, justice and
Oh, no, it's perfectly fine if we live in a house together. Like you can say you live in a house of 5 people. There's nothing wrong with having rules about behavior, and there's nothing wrong with having like if you steal the food from the fridge 4 times, the house better decide to throw you out. Nothing wrong with having rules that we agree how we live together. Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly reasonable, as long as it's based on compassion. Like if you're a good parent, you'll be very clear with your child. No more chocolate. Go to your room. I told you, but it's got to come from compassion as a growing experience. If it's just coming from punitive and vindictive, which is what it is, it's all a disaster. And so in other words, the one of karma is not nihilistic, or therefore anybody can do whatever they like because it's all karma. That's absurd. That's kind of ridiculous.
So how do we not blame?
Pardon?
How do we not blame?
Practice the habit. It's just an intensely difficult habit to practice. And if we analyze that, it's of course we blame. See, this is the thing, this whole business of blame and guilt and victim and not fair and poor me and how dare, all those words, which is how we feel. No one actually taught us this. We can blame our Jewish mother and Catholic mother, but then they're really, the Buddha would say, these attitudes are rooted in all these delusions. These habits we've practiced for countless lives. They're basically viewpoints that we've cultivated. So how you change a viewpoint is by arguing with it. So this is why I always use that example of those young Tibetan nuns. I don't know if you've heard this example. You must have. These young women, when Richard Gere invited Dalai Lama here in New York, 2003, he invited these young nuns. And they, and they talked about their suffering experience, raped, and they were attacked, sexually abused and tortured in prison. Now, that's, of course, is exactly the reason we're going to be angry and outraged and have mental breakdown and have stress and look at the world. So if you analyze it from the Buddhist perspective, which is the point here, those young women, what was really evident to all the other people, there's a group of 20 people, American prisoners, black, white, male, female, a whole cross-section of human beings who'd been in prison and who'd done some kind of meditation in prison. They were invited for the day by Richard Gere. And I was there too. Some people like me who worked with people. And if you analyze it carefully, was evident to all those the Americans, most of whom had the typical view, I didn't ask to get born. It isn't my fault. Either God made me, mummy made me. And that's the view. Do you realize that you accept that's the view we have, isn't it? Let's say you have a materialist view. Let's say that is your philosophy. Let's just say, then that means your mother and father did make you. You agree with that? And that means then it's true if someone comes along and punches you in the nose, it's really true you don't deserve it because you've never met this person before. And that's the view we have. But if you have the view of karma, you have met them before. So we think life is good luck and bad luck. So you win the lottery, aren't I lucky? In other words, there's no cause. But the Buddha will say there is a cause. It's called your past generosity. Do you see my point here? So it's really good to remember the good things as well. So these young women, it was evident to everybody in that room that they weren't angry. And it was clear they weren't suppressing. They were sad. There were tears, but they didn't. In other words, if you analyze what anger is, this is really powerful. What is anger saying? It's saying, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. And if you were made by your parents and you didn't ask to get born, then I agree with that as a philosophy. It is completely fitting. Are you seeing my point? Are you seeing my point philosophically? So if you have the view of karma, like those young women, and that's the point, they've been brought up in that, and that's in the bones of Tibetans for the last 1200 years. The karmic view has been in the bones of people in Asia. I mean, our Indians don't have karma. They're all scientists, you know. They couldn't care less about karma. They're better at science than we are. And they're all here, I understand. So that's been in the bones of Asians for 3,000 years, coming from these genius Indians well before the Buddha. This view of karma coming from their observation that that's the natural law of the universe. But now, so the creator one is the one we have in religion, or it's the materialist one, which predominates in our world. Both of which say that someone else made you, both of which say, therefore, you had nothing to do with being you. I find it very powerful to put it like that. So not surprising we get angry. I didn't ask to get born, we say. Now, those young women have in their bones, since they're born, the view of karma as the most natural view on the planet. So when you internalize that, and I'm really serious here, you literally don't have the thought, how dare you do that to me? You can't, because that's not your philosophy. It's in the bones, the philosophy. You know why it's happening. So those young women,
Right.
let me just finish the story. Just one more sentence. I know you've heard it. So at the end, one of them was in tears, quiet, and she said, they gave their story, you know, to everybody. And of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past. So that's the view in their mind. So that informs the way they behave. So there's a slow process. I mean, we don't have to have the view of karma. It's up to us, you know. And I can say for myself, just before I finish, that for me, working on this sincerely, I like the view of karma. I love the view of karma. For me, when I first heard the Dharma, that was the piece that was missing in my life. I think it's the most amazing philosophy, the most viable that I can find for why things happen. So I found it really powerful and a really major source of my ability to change my mind, even to the bit that I have, is the view of karma, which causes me to see the world very differently now. So it's a slow process. Are we communicating?
Yeah,
Yeah, go, please.
So for those young women that were tortured and raped.
Yes.
So they're thinking, well, that happened because in a past life I did something.
Yeah, of course, this
You
just
know,
goes without saying. It's natural for
but
them.
it doesn't mean I will not seek justice.
No, it does.
You know?
No, it does. It does. And they didn't go to the courts after. You don't have to. You could if you wanted to. You could if you wanted to. They could if they wanted to. But 90% of the time we go to the courts because we're angry. And we want these motherfuckers to suffer. So when you have, so if they were in a situation where they were in charge of like a state, they wouldn't have that view. But for yourself, you give up so much of that vindictiveness and you're able to deal with it and move on. If there is something to be done, like get your money back because someone cheated you, that's okay, but it will be done from compassion. You with me? It takes time. It's a whole layering of process, layering and layering of viewpoints. Do you understand? We're communicating? Yeah. Good. And if you want to go to court, then do lots of mantras and do special practice and get your money back. Good on you. And do it also for compassion for this person because you don't want them to suffer from stealing. You can add compassion to it as well. Nothing wrong with that. Very sensible. It doesn't make you passive. The opposite.
Yeah, because I had a really painful childhood.
Yes.
I spent decades of my life thinking, oh, life owes me. You know,
Yeah, that's right. No, that's
like
right. That's
they
right.
have to
Yes,
take
yes,
everything, they
that's
have to
right.
pay me whole.
Yes, yes.
You know, they owe me something.
That's right.
Somebody owes me something.
Exactly. And this is the interesting point. So what underpins that concept is somehow that someone else made you, isn't it? Who is this they otherwise? You see, if when you have a view of karma, you know you created yourself. There's no they. Do you see what I'm saying? It's quite subtle. Slowly. We see where we're at. We deal with it. We have support and courage. And everybody suffers, and some people suffer 1,000 times more at the hands of others. And the trouble is when we hear the word karma, we hear the view of karma, we tend to go, well, they deserve it. Because we have this awful blame mentality, you know. Whereas for those young women, it was the basis of compassion. And that's why you've got to have compassion for yourself first. Do you understand? Slowly, you know. Yes. Hang on, sweetheart, go. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about this idea of thoughts causing feelings.
Good, okay, good. Let's talk about it. Very good.
Can I add a little more?
Yeah, go.
When I think about my experience of guilt in particular,
Guilt,
the
yeah.
way I tend to experience what I call guilt is I have a feeling that feels very abstract,
Yeah.
and then I add a label to it.
What do you mean? So start again. I didn't understand that point.
So I, in some situation, I'm falling asleep at night or something.
You what?
Falling asleep at night. Maybe there wasn't anything particular that just happened, but I have this feeling
Of
of
you're a bad person,
not quite. It's a little bit more abstract.
dissatisfied,
It
not
means
happy,
sorry
sorry.
for something.
Okay, I see. I know. If that was a little bit maybe guilt, a little kind of a feeling of a habit of guilt. You can't think of anything overt or explicit. No, I
Right, and then
understand.
I go and I try to figure out why.
Yeah,
and
no,
come
it's
up
just
with
habit.
some label.
I hear. Well, good point. So what that is habit. Just the habit of feeling guilty, the habit of not doing what mummy said and daddy said and God said and judge said and police say. And then it's rooted in all the time noticing how people think of us and worrying about we're saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. It's very deep inside us, darling. It's just habit. It's not abstract. It's just habit. It's just habit. Even though you didn't do anything wrong today, it's just habit. Always is, and that's very rooted also in the primordial feeling of the practice of attachment, which is dissatisfaction. Somehow you're never enough. I'm not doing good enough. It's all mixed with that. That's the function of attachment. It's ancient habit of being dissatisfied. No matter what we do, it's somehow not quite enough. It's all, I think, mixed with that. So let's look at how then thoughts, how feelings are rooted in thoughts. That's the major point that Buddha's making in his model of the mind. We have two, this is first the technical one. We've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness, okay? So sensory is a very specific part of our mind that, say, eyeball is there, and then there's a part of our mind that's not physical, which is the eye consciousness. It's a very specific part that can cognize only two things, shape and color. It's very precise, okay? Ear consciousness can only cognize sound. So that already we're confused because we give a lot more power to the senses. We will say, wow, isn't that a pretty design? We'll say, I would say that, let's say. And we assume it's my eyes are seeing a pretty design. Well, technically, no, it's not possible. The senses are very limited. So you have to ask the question, if the eye consciousness is not cognizing a pretty design, what part of my mind is, and that's your mental consciousness. That's, as Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. That's where all your thoughts and feelings and emotions and intellect and unconscious and subconscious and craziness and virtue and psychopathy, whatever you want to call it, that's the big fat soup that we have to become familiar with. But our trouble is just one extra point. We give way more power to the senses than they have. And this is quite sobering, actually, because then you realize, because what's happening is, like I always say, your eyes go here in a millionth of a second, I will say, what a pretty design. What actually happened is the eye consciousness did the cognizing, and because everything I've ever seen or heard or tasted or touched or smelled since the beginning of this time, Buddha says, not to mention this life, is stored in my memory. So in a millionth of a second, quicker than Google, up comes what? A series of words. They're words, they're thoughts. What a pretty design. Now, that's one thing. Can you hear its thoughts? Can you hear that it's thoughts? And there's not too much feeling there, is there? But what if you punch me in the nose and I'm raging angry 20 times more than Jim, and I scream at you as well as punch you in the nose, right? Write down my words, please, what I'm saying. What else are words but thoughts? If you read those words, you can't hear me shouting. You hear words, don't you? So there's no way in the universe, if that my fist would do that and my heart would be shaking and the spit coming out my mouth and my words are raging if there weren't thoughts there. But the reason they're emotional is because I've practiced them. That's all. That's it. So that's all, because I've practiced thinking those thoughts. Buddha says for eons. And I came into this life program with angry thoughts, and instantaneously, because I'd practiced them to perfection, I didn't have to learn to be angry. My mother didn't have to teach me, now clench your fist better, Robina, shout louder, darling. I knew how, because it's my habit. So it's like this practice is this reverse process of controlling the body and speech first, not vomiting, like Jim's talking, and slowly with practice, the energy gets less, not because you're suppressing, but then the more and more I hear the thoughts before they get to the emotional level. That's the practice. And that goes to an incredible dream when you get single point of concentration and you access these much subtle levels of mind that we don't even posit as existing in the West. Then you have incredible, brilliant microscope of your mind that can unpack and unravel at a subtle level these insane conceptual thoughts that we've been living in since the beginning of this time. It's really subtle. Slowly. You with me?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Very much.
Good, darling. Wonderful. Yes, Eileen, you had your hand up. 2:45. Wait, what's the plan? Yep, go.
The reason why I had my hand up and then I lowered it because everything we're talking about, we look at the world, right? So I have certain feelings and beliefs about what's wrong. I mean, I have a certain attachment to, I see what's happening in the Ukraine, the homeless, women, etc. So, and then I think, well, it's karma, right? There are shootings and certain people get killed. And if you're a woman living in Alabama, you're in more trouble than if you're living in New York.
And if you win $1 million in the lottery, it's karma. And if someone kisses you, it's karma. And if you're happy, it's karma. We only remember the bad things.
Yes. But again, my response to things.
The question, darling.
The question is, if I'm raging at the TV, obviously, this is about my own mind.
Clearly.
and my own belief systems about the way.
Oh, it's called, don't call it belief system, call it anger and attachment. It's very simple. Eileen, keep it simple. It's called your anger and your attachment.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that there's no war in Ukraine. It doesn't mean women aren't suffering. It doesn't mean you don't have compassion for people, but that's not the part that shouts and yells. It's the anger.
Yes.
That's it. So just distinguish bit of you is responding. That's it, darling.
And then other people, for instance, don't want to hear it at all, which would be aversion.
What do you mean that you want to hear it at all?
Well, some people don't want to watch.
Excuse me, yours is aversion. You don't want to hear it, so you shout and yell at it.
That's right.
Other people just don't care.
Right. Yes. Okay.
You with me?
I am. Yes. Thank you.
Aversion is the state of mind that anger is a violent expression of. That's all. Depression is a state of mind that's an internalized version of built-up aversion, habit. Because the two kinds. I always think of the two kinds of people: the loud, shouting, yelling ones, and the quiet ones. Nothing wrong with the quiet ones, at least they don't harm others. But we've all got attachment and aversion, Eileen, and they're working 1 million times a day. Attachment is this constant hunger to get only the nice things, and aversion is this panic attack when you don't get the nice things. And in the beginning, I mean, the slurping of the tea and your hurting your toe, they're baby events, but they are moments of anger, Eileen, but they're baby. They're just moments of annoyance, frustration, upset. We don't think they're anger. That's why we don't go to the therapist, but they're anger, and they build up and become violent anger, or you suppress them and then you can't get out of bed one day because you're depressed. Depression is a buildup of internalized aversion, unexpressed aversion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. What else? People. Yes.
Can I ask another?
Yes, of course.
Through my Zendo, I just started a correspondence with someone in prison in Michigan, just like I described.
Okay.
He spends 23 hours alone in his cell.
What? She spent what?
He spends 23 hours a day in his cell alone.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, get it.
So I don't know how to talk to him. I don't know how do I tell him not to be angry?
No, you don't. You can't. So does he tell you how he feels about things? Has he got a practice? Does he have a practice? No.
He's Christian.
He's Christian. Does he have a practice?
Not that I know.
I understand. Does he? So you don't know. So how come you're writing to him? How come he's writing to you?
Just,
So he wants a pen pal.
yeah.
So what does he talk about in his letter?
He talks about how he's fighting to be to lessen the conditions of his imprisonment.
Okay.
Because he was 19 at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Exactly.
So he missed the cutoff by 1 year.
Oh God. Yes.
He
I
had
can
to be
imagine.
18.
I can imagine. So the thing is, when you are anybody, like any human being in front of you, let's say they're 5 years old, you've got to get a sense of where that 5-year-old is at, so you know how to talk to them, isn't it? So if you have an old lady in front of you who's deaf, you've got to have a sense of how she has to be talked to. So each person in front of you, so he's a guy on death row who's a Christian, that informs how he thinks, and by his words, you determine how to talk to him. So you take him from where he's at. Just ask him to talk about, how do you feel about this? And what's your view about Christian? What's your view about, and encourage him to talk about it. And then you can discuss with his viewpoints. You know, he might never be interested in anything. He might never want to look at his mind. He might just want to rave on. And of course, in a prison, because they're shitty places, you might say you've got a religion, but if you don't really practice, you're just miserable. So it's up to you to see if there's some way you can kind of just be his friend for a start, have no thought to try and tell him not to be angry or anything else. Just take him where he's at and be his friend, and then see where it goes, you know. I think that's
It's very clear. He's very angry, but he's also very sad.
of course sad, yes.
Yeah.
Of course he is brokenhearted, of course. And that technically is aversion, when you're sad and brokenhearted. When it just, you see, sadness is it's a mixture. I think there's a mixture. Sadness is a mixture of kind of broken expectations, which is attachment, which is also aversion, and also aversion. It's a mixture, you know, and then the loneliness of only having himself and doesn't know how to work on his mind, doesn't know how to, and he's treated probably like a shitty person. You know, these prisons are pretty horrible. There's a mixture there. So just be affectionate, be kind, be his friend, and see if that can see where it goes, you know. That's the best you can do. You can't take his pain away. And that's what I did find with our prison project over the years. Thousands of people, when I was running it for 10, 12 years, 15 years, up till 2009, that's what I knew at most, still going. I remember that one of the main gifts was simply being a human being in their life. This is the thing of the tragedy of the numbers in prison, that also the people mostly working class and poor, no money, no friends, no family, many of them, so many. I mean, so many stories. I remember one guy in a regular kind of middle security prison had to go take it into town to go to the dentist. And he said, the nurse said to him, "How are you today?" And he burst into tears. No one asked him that, you know. So just giving some human kindness. And the miracle was, so often many of the guys who didn't even become Buddhists, they might have been for a little bit, for whatever, just it was having a human being contact. That's the most precious gift. And there's more that comes from it. That's up to him. Do you understand? And don't be sentimental. You know, be wise, hear how he's talking, get a sense of where he's at. Acknowledge his experiences, you know.
You know, one of the interesting things he said was that he said something about how the universe is so mysterious, because he had a brother that's outside, and he said, "But my brother had cancer and died."
My what?
His brother had
Cancer and died, yes.
And he said, "And I'm still here."
Yeah, that's right.
Even though it's miserable. and
No, that's right,
horrible.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, he hasn't, obviously he's not got a view. He says he's a Christian, but he hasn't got much of a view of, you know, God made the universe and God has a plan. Really devoted Christians know it's all God's will. So it's like, that's up to him. But I mean, if he's really a devoted Christian, you can help him have more faith in God. Because I mean, I think of a creator view, it makes sense if you've got the view of a creator, that God did make the universe, which means God has a plan. They all say that. So then try and encourage him to try and have that view, but not don't give him lectures. So if he is Christian, you can encourage his Christianity, you know, and that means you need to know how Christians think. Does that thought help you? What do you think? What do you make of the view that God has a plan? Do you think he's got a plan for you? Just be friendly and see he can take him with his own view to get more courage, you know. Do you understand? Very good. Very good. Time to go home, I think. Almost. Okay, people. Good. So I'll be back in 2 Wednesdays, won't I? Or is it one month later? What's the stuff?
Come back on February 6th.
For the evening. So the daytimes are once a month and the evenings are once a month, aren't they? Okay. See, look, I told you people would turn up. Oh, no one's going to come at 1:30. I said, have you not noticed George's bloody yoga classes are full at 1:30? They're human beings just like the Buddhists. Sunny, Sheila, am I not wrong? I'm right, aren't I? And I'm a smarty pants, but there you go. So good. I'm happy. So we do what we can with all this. Thank you for having me talk, because a lot of clarity came for me today. So I'm very pleased. Thank you. Just keep moving, never give up, do our best, you know, so we're our works in progress. Be kind, be rigorous, be honest, be authentic. Don't have guilt. You know, and keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. That's all I can say, everybody. Jangchob, Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchig, Ke Panyampa Me Payang, Gong Ne Gondu Pabashog. May compassion, bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. That's it, people. So compassion and then compassion. That's it. Thank you, precious ones. Much love, people. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, goodbye.
Thank you. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you. Thank you, Shantideva.
Bye, Anna.
Bye, Mary. Bye, Beth. Thank you, Shantideva. Bye, everyone.